Have you ever looked at the horizon of your life, felt completely overwhelmed by just the crushing weight of modern expectations or burnout, and wondered if, well, if the heavens have just gone silent?
Yeah, or like you take a massive leap of faith, you do exactly what God asks you to do, and your life immediately gets worse.
Right, exactly. Like the people you were trying to help suddenly turn on you, and your daily burdens literally double.
It's one of the most difficult spiritual paradoxes we ever have to navigate, honestly.
It really is. And, we expect that when we align ourselves with a divine directive, the sea will just part immediately.
Right, but more often than not, the chains just get tighter. The environment becomes entirely inhospitable before any relief actually shows up.
So true. Well, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I am your host, and with me is our resident expert. And today we're diving right into that exact paradox.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one. We're taking a really fascinating look at the opening chapters of the book of Exodus, specifically chapters 1 through 6.
But, and this is key for you listening, we aren't just approaching this as ancient history. We are pairing it with insights from President Thomas S. Monson's address, Dare to Stand Alone, alongside some deeply analytical commentaries.
Right. Our mission here is to frame this as a survival guide for navigating our own modern Egypts.
Exactly. We're going to explore how moral courage, understanding your true identity, and trusting a God who actively remembers his covenants can empower you to stand firm, even when you feel completely alone.
So, to really understand the magnitude of the deliverance in this story, we kind of have to start in the absolute dark of the bondage.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
Well, Exodus opens with a massive political shift. A new Pharaoh comes to power, and the text says he's one who knew not Joseph.
Which means all that historical favor the Israelites once enjoyed is just completely erased.
Exactly. They are enslaved. And the text is highly specific here. Their lives are made bitter with hard bondage in mortar and brick.
It's just systemic, absolute oppression becoming their daily reality.
Right. And then Pharaoh takes it to an unimaginable extreme. He orders the extermination of all newborn Hebrew boys.
Which is horrifying. But what I find so striking about this narrative is who the frontline heroes actually are.
Oh, absolutely.
When confronted with, state-sponsored genocide, the ones who mount the resistance aren't warriors with swords. They are a group of incredible women engaging in quiet, terrifying rebellion.
The Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puah, are prime examples of this.
Yeah, let's talk about them.
I mean, the most powerful monarch on earth commands them to carry out this extermination, and they simply refuse.
Just flat out refuse.
Yeah, and the scriptures don't even describe a dramatic showdown. They just give a clear internal motivation. The midwives feared God more than they feared the king.
They are the catalyst, but they aren't the only ones, right? You have Jochebed, Moses' mother, carefully constructing that ark of bulrushes to hide her son. You have his sister Miriam bravely tracking the basket down the river. You even have Pharaoh's own daughter showing immense compassion.
Pulling a Hebrew baby from the water in blatant defiance of her own father's royal decree.
It's wild. These women possessed just absolute moral clarity. They knew what was inherently right, and they acted on it despite the mortal danger to themselves.
And God rewarded the midwives for that courage, giving them families of their own. But, when we look at their moral certainty, it stands in stark contrast to our modern landscape.
Right, which President Monson highlighted quite vividly in his address.
He did. He cited a 2008 New York Times article that detailed a Notre Dame sociological study.
Oh, this study is fascinating.
It really is. Researchers interviewed 230 young adults across America, just asking them open-ended questions about right and wrong and how they navigate moral dilemmas.
And the results were stunning, but mostly because of what wasn't said.
Exactly. 2/3 of these young adults either couldn't answer the question or they described problems that weren't moral at all.
Yeah, like they talked about the stress of affording rent or whether they had enough quarters for a parking meter.
They literally lacked the vocabulary to discuss morality.
Right.
Their default position, repeated almost mechanically across the interviews, was, "It's personal," or "Who am I to say?"
Just completely subjective.
Right. They had defaulted to a baseline of, "I do what makes me happy."
It's not that they chose to speak badly, right? It's that society literally never taught them the alphabet of right and wrong.
That's a great way to put it.
When you read that study, it feels like moral courage is a muscle. And our modern institutions aren't giving people the resources to cultivate their moral intuitions. The gym is closed, so the muscle atrophies. It's like a language that is dying out. But Shifra and Puah were fluent in it. They spoke that moral language directly into the face of a global empire. But I have to ask, how do we build that muscle when doing the right thing might literally cost us everything?
Well, it requires deciding beforehand that your allegiance to eternal laws is stronger than your blind deference to worldly authority.
So getting your priorities straight before the crisis hits.
Exactly. The midwives didn't wait until the moment the baby was born to decide if they respected God more than Pharaoh. That moral anchor was already dropped.
And because of that deeply anchored courage, one specific baby survives. He's drawn from the river and grows up in the royal courts of the exact man trying to destroy his people.
Talk about a complicated childhood.
Seriously, this creates an incredible tension of identity. I mean, how does a person figure out who they are when they are caught between two totally conflicting worlds?
You can actually see that tension embedded in his very name, Moses, or Moshe in Hebrew.
Oh, I love this part.
Right. In Hebrew, the root means to draw out, which is literal, since he was drawn from the water. But it's also a prophecy of his life's mission to draw out Israel from bondage.
But there's an Egyptian meaning too, right?
Yes, in Egyptian, the name means son.
That dual meaning is just brilliant. It points toward Israel's identity as God's firstborn son, while also profoundly foreshadowing Jesus Christ, the ultimate son, who draws humanity out of spiritual bondage.
Exactly. But Moses has to actually discover and claim this identity for himself. And his first major act as an adult is, well, it's violent.
Yeah, it really is.
He sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew slave. Moses looks around, slays the Egyptian, and hides the body in the sand.
Okay, wait, I have to stop here and push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I really struggle with this part of the story. Moses murders a guy and buries him in the dirt. I understand he's defending a slave, but I have a hard time seeing how we can frame a homicide as a positive example of moral courage.
That's a completely fair reaction.
Like, it just feels like a massive rationalization of a crime.
It is a messy, deeply imperfect start to his journey. There's no getting around that. And legally, it was a crime that led directly to his exile.
Right.
But we have to look at how the scriptural text and later commentaries interpret the raw motivation behind it.
Okay, how do they interpret it?
Well, according to the New Testament commentary in Acts, Moses saw his brother suffering wrong and defended him. He couldn't stomach the systemic abuse of the weak.
So it wasn't just a random act of violence.
No, it wasn't calculated, cold-blooded murder. It was the raw, unrefined instinct of a deliverer acting out against an unjust system.
So you are saying God uses flawed people whose methods might initially be completely wrong, but their internal instincts for justice are pointed in the right direction.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The key takeaway here is the internal shift. In that visceral moment, Moses abandoned his royal privilege.
He made a choice.
He chose to align with the suffering slaves rather than his comfortable palace life. He proved he was willing to stand alone for his people, even if his execution of that justice was terribly flawed.
Wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense. And that concept of abandoning comfort to stand with your people connects perfectly to the story President Monson shared from his own life.
Oh, the Navy boot camp story.
Yes. So he was in Navy boot camp at the end of World War II. He is out on the drill ground in the brisk California breeze, and the chief petty officer yells out that everyone is going to church.
Which is a very intimidating environment to single yourself out in.
Entirely. The officer orders all the Catholics to march away to one camp. Then he orders the Jewish sailors to march to another. Then the Protestants to a third.
And Monson is left standing there.
Right. He realizes he isn't any of those. He just stands there, entirely alone on the drill ground. He said he was determined but terrified.
I can only imagine.
Then the officer aggressively asks what they call themselves. Monson suddenly hears voices behind him answer, "Mormons," in unison.
He hadn't even realized other sailors were standing behind him.
Exactly. He remembered an old primary rhyme from his childhood. Dare to be a Mormon, dare to stand alone.
It perfectly encapsulates the necessity of claiming your identity. When you know who you are, you can stand your ground, whether that is on a Navy drill ground or in the courts of Egypt.
But because of his choice, Moses trades the royal palace for Midian. He loses everything. And it's no coincidence that when God finally speaks to him, it happens at Mount Horeb.
No coincidence at all. Do you know what the name Horeb translates to?
I think it means desolate, right?
Yes, desolate or dry. God didn't appear in a lush oasis. He chose a barren wasteland.
Why do you think he did that?
To prove to Moses and eventually to all of Israel that life, power, and deliverance rely 100% on him, not on the surrounding environment.
Oh, that's powerful.
In a place where nothing can survive on its own, a bush burns with fire but is not consumed. It is a brilliant visual representation of God's self-sustaining power.
And God speaks from the bush and tells Moses to take off his shoes, declaring the ground to be holy, even though it's literally just dry desert dirt.
Right, the holiness doesn't come from the geography, it comes from the presence of God.
So taking off the shoes is about removing our casualness toward sacred things.
Exactly. It teaches us a vital lesson about our own desolate seasons. We have to treat our own trials as holy ground when we invite God into them.
Which Moses desperately needs to understand because he immediately gets hit with massive imposter syndrome.
Oh, major imposter syndrome.
God outlines the mission to go to Pharaoh, and Moses literally says, "Who am I?" He lists his perceived inadequacies, complaining that he is slow of speech.
He is entirely focused on his own limitations.
And God's response is fascinating to me. God doesn't give him a pep talk.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't say, "Moses, you have a great education from Egypt. You're highly empathetic. You're a natural leader." Instead, God just gives Moses his own name. I am that I am.
The self-existent one, the ultimate source of all reality.
It's like Moses is asking for a resume to prove he's qualified for the job, and God just hands him a blank piece of paper with the CEO's signature at the bottom.
That's a perfect analogy.
The answer to who and I is actually look at who God is.
Right. And when Moses complains about his mouth, God simply asks, "Who hath made man's mouth?"
He just refocuses him completely.
And to solidify this, God provides signs. The rod turning into a serpent, Moses' hand turning leprous and then healing, water turning to blood. He even assigns Aaron to be the spokesman.
So all of this is structured to prove that God is the true hero of this deliverance, not Moses' public speaking skills.
Exactly. When we feel utterly inadequate in our careers, our families, or our faith, we have to lean on the promise God made there. Certainly I will be with thee.
So, armed with this absolute divine backing, Moses returns to Egypt. He walks up to Pharaoh, delivers the message, and you would think the sea would part right then.
You'd hope so.
But instead, Pharaoh arrogantly replies, "Who is the Lord?" And to punish the Israelites, he demands they make the exact same daily tally of bricks. But he stops providing the straw they need to make them.
Which is just cruel.
They have to go scavenge the land for it themselves while still hitting the same quota.
It is a devastating, crushing blow to an already broken people. And predictably, the Israelite officers turn entirely against Moses.
They blame him for making their lives exponentially harder.
And even Moses breaks under the pressure. He goes back to God and asks, "Wherefore hast thou so evil entreated this people? Why is it that thou hast sent me?"
He is basically saying, I did what you asked and you haven't delivered them at all.
Right.
When Moses complains to God there, he is voicing the exact frustration you feel when you try to do the right thing and get punished for it. You start thinking, I did everything you asked. Why did you take my straw away?
Commentators actually refer to this period as the trial of faith.
A trial of faith. Why does God let things get worse before they get better?
Well, to understand why God allows the conditions to worsen, we have to look at the psychology of the Israelites.
Okay, unpack that for us.
They had been in Egypt for 400 years. It was their entire world. They were suffering from a cultural Stockholm syndrome, completely dependent on the very structures that were enslaving them.
Oh, wow. So they didn't even know how to be free.
Right. God had to make Egypt entirely inhospitable so they would actually want to leave. He had to break their dependence on their captors before he could lead them into the wilderness.
So in the midst of that breaking point in Exodus chapter 6, God drops a theological bombshell. He tells Moses, I have remembered my covenant.
Yes, this is so important.
But it's funny, God says he remembered them. It makes it sound like he was distracted and just forgot about them for 4 centuries.
In English, remember sounds like a passive thought, like, oh, I remembered where I left my keys.
Right, exactly.
But in Hebrew, the word is Zakar. It is vital to understand that Zakar is an executable command.
The executable command.
Yeah. Think of it like a computer program initiating a sequence. It is a call to action. When God remembers, he takes immediate, decisive action based on a previous promise.
Like completely changes the meaning. But trusting God's covenant isn't a one-way street, is it?
Not at all.
God remembers his promises, but he demands we keep ours, which explains that bizarre, almost shocking moment on the journey back to Egypt.
Oh, this part is intense.
The text says the Lord met Moses and sought to kill him.
It is a really jarring passage.
How do scholars even interpret that?
Scholars interpret this intense encounter as Moses having failed to perform the sign of the Abrahamic covenant circumcision on his own son.
Wait, really?
Yes. Moses is returning to Egypt to act as the great deliverer under the authority of the covenant. But he himself is in active violation of its most basic requirement.
He cannot act as the covenant deliverer while breaking the covenant.
Exactly. And this is where Zipporah, Moses' wife, steps in.
She immediately performs the circumcision herself, right?
She does, and her name is super symbolic here.
Her name means bird or freedom, doesn't it?
Yes. By stepping in and fulfilling the covenant requirements, she literally saves Moses' life and preserves the mission of deliverance.
That is incredible.
It highlights a universal truth. The covenant must be honored by us for the power of the covenant to flow from God.
But once it does, God's promise is secure.
Absolutely. Once that's settled, God's promise to Abraham is unconditional in its ultimate fulfillment. In chapter 6, God repeatedly declares, "I will bring you out. I will rid you out of their bondage. I will redeem you."
So if the promise is unconditional, what is the ultimate purpose of the struggle? Like, why the delay with the straw and the bricks?
Because the end goal of the Exodus isn't just physical freedom so the Israelites can sit around and be idle.
It's not just a permanent vacation.
Right. The goal is a complete transformation. God intends to turn them from slaves of Pharaoh into a kingdom of priests who serve God.
Serve God.
Yes. The Hebrew word used for serve is avod. The Exodus isn't about escaping work. It's about fundamentally changing who you work for.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
The delay, the crushing struggle without straw, the eventual wandering, all of that is the forge where their new identity is created.
That changes the entire perspective on hardship. The struggle isn't a punishment, it is the preparation.
Exactly.
Deliverance from our personal Egypts is rarely an instant event. It requires the moral courage to stand alone, like the midwives facing down a king, or President Monson standing on that drill ground when he didn't know anyone was behind him. It requires the humility to take off our shoes and recognize holy ground in the most desolate, dry seasons of our lives.
And above all, it requires the faith to trust the great I Am, even when our burdens temporarily increase.
Because when God says he remembers you, when he initiates that Zakar, the wheels of your deliverance are already in motion.
Even if you can't see them yet.
To wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought drawn from President Monson's address. He mentions receiving a letter from a man who had spent his life trying to have his cake and eat it too.
Very common trap.
Yeah. This man tried to live both the ways of the world and the ways of God. He tried to serve two masters simultaneously. And he wrote that in the end, all he found was the profound emptiness, darkness, and loneliness that comes from chasing those illusions.
The scriptures are clear on this. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve Pharaoh and the great I Am.
You have to choose. Moses' very name means to draw out. God is ready and willing to draw you out of your personal Egypt. But you have to be willing to let go of the chains.
That's the hard part.
So, as you stand on the shores of your own Red Sea today, ask yourself, are you truly willing to leave the idols and the comforts of Egypt behind? Or are you secretly just looking for a way to make the brick-making a little easier?
The deliverance is waiting. But the choice of who you will serve, who gets your avod, is entirely yours.
Think about that the next time you look at the horizon and feel that crushing weight. The heavens aren't silent. The great I Am is already at work. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep standing firm, and keep exploring.